Jam-packed to the rafters, let's go up to our ring announcer.
The following podcast is scheduled for one episode.
It's Acid Wash Memories, a retro pop culture celebration.
Outside, couldn't see those acid wash memories.
And now your hosts, Joe Murata and Michael Quinn.
Welcome to episode number 100 of Acid Wash Memories, a retro pop culture celebration. It is Monday, December 16th, 2024. We are here to romp you through the world of retro pop culture. As always, I'm Joe Murata, joined by Michael Quinn. How you doing there, Michael?
Howdy diddy.
Quinn, another week in the world of retro pop culture here?
World of retro. Yes, that's what we do. That's what we call it every week.
Every week, this is the intro we do.
This is the same song we open with all the time.
Yeah, this is our normal opening that we always do.
This is exactly the way it is.
And this is episode 100. We are getting into... As Quinn opens up a non-alcoholic. It's seltzer.
It is a celebration, though.
It is. Right? We are getting into the 90s wrestling boom. Those of you keen listeners to Acid Wash Memories would know that when we hit episode 50, we did the 80s wrestling boom.
Right.
And Quinn, you offhandedly said, oh, when are we going to do the 90s? Episode 100?
Probably, yeah.
And here we are, folks. But if you're a first-timer or a long-timer, we sure appreciate you being with us here. You can find us on Twitter at AWM Podcast. That's AWM Podcast on Twitter. And Quinn, if people want to talk to you and me and hundreds of other retro pop culture fanatics, where can they go?
Over to facebook.acidwashfoot.web. It's a good website.
What do you do to get to the group?
You hit the join button and you're in.
Is there tubes or anything?
There's tubes, gore, kaflooey. Is that what I said?
Yeah, tubes, gore, kaflooey.
Okay, we're doing a gimmick, everyone.
Yeah, this is called a gimmick.
It's like the old show that we did.
Yeah,
remember when we did that show?
Here on Acid Wash Memories, if you consume our content only on this podcast feed,
you're like, what the hell are they talking about? Other show?
Other show. We've only talked about wrestling a couple of times and made some offhanded references here and there, but it's only been the topic of discussion one other time, and that was episode 50. However, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the way you look at it, Quinn and I have also hosted and still do a retro wrestling show called Our Vantage Point Retro Wrestling Podcast on a different feed.
Yeah, it's more of a live watch these days, but it used to be like a real show, a real podcast show.
So did this.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yes.
But what we're doing here is kind of presenting wrestling through the acid wash lens.
The mainstream light, if you will.
Because on a
not going to be, actually's around here.
No.
Right?
Actually,
So for those of you, and I'd estimate it's maybe 75% of our listeners know who we are from OVP, right? Those of you that are really into the wrestling, or if you're stumbling upon this and you're like, oh, these guys are being very broad about wrestling, what's that all about? This is not
for
that. We have over 300 episodes.
If you want to deep dive into these topics, this is for the other 25% or whatever that are like, I don't know about this wrestling thing. It's the guys in the underwear. And
right, I kind of remember that.
Greasy, and then the ladies wrestle too. And
something with steroids.
Something steroids, Vince McMahon.
Hulk Hogan's the champion still,
Hulk Hogan,
right?
Yeah, he never lost.
He never loses.
Nah, brother, I think I lost more than I won, huh?
So we're here to really present, though, in all seriousness, the explosion in popularity in the late 90s in particular of professional wrestling. And when we say that, we mean where it broke out of its niche a bit because it's maintained a consistent baseline popularity its entire existence.
Yeah, I would say if you were to do a graph chart here, it was big in the 80s and then it went down and then it got real big in the 90s again, but it was even bigger than the 80s, right? So it's kind of like a stock graph, right? It's like there's the dip, but then it comes back up higher than it was before, right? But the problem with wrestling is then it went down again, and then it's a flat line forever.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, WWE these days is making strides to get it back to them. It's going on Netflix soon after it's still higher than it was in the 80s, but it's it hasn't gotten higher than it was in the 90s. I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot to be said about it, and we're not here to say all of it. What we're here to do is recap the fallout a little bit of the 80s era and the doldrums of the early 90s.
Yep.
Then we'll talk about...
It sucked.
It did.
That's the preview.
It sucks!
And then in the late 90s why exactly it exploded back into the pop culture scene. So that's what we're here to do. I want to thank everyone that has listened to any of these episodes. We've done 100 of them now, which is pretty crazy. I want to also, programming alert, we are going to be going on a quick holiday hiatus the next couple of weeks. So if you're listening in real time, we're not going to have new episodes these next 2 weeks.
I got to go away for the holidays.
Yes.
It's a whole operation, really.
There's a lot of things going on.
And I can't exactly like take half the studio and pack it on a plane, and then we'll do it remote or something.
Imagine you just haul this shit on a plane.
It's like TSA. They're like, "What is all this?
What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah.
The fuck are you doing?
So we just wanted to be upfront with you guys that are listening in order. Again, if you're listening to this in like 2026, it means nothing to you. Just there's another episode right behind it.
Right.
But we're just saying in real time. Okay. So when we talked about the 80s wrestling boom, we covered a lot of wrestling from its inception and when it became real. I mean, when it became kayfabe. So I'm just going to do like 3 bullet points here. In the early 20th century, it was very popular. That's around the time that it became kayfabe, as they say.
Yeah,
Quinn.
kayfabe, the fake.
Worked.
Yeah, that means the fake.
Frank Gotch was one of the big stars in. I'm not kidding around. And then in the mid-50s, we've talked about this. During the dawn of the TV era, professional wrestling was cheap to produce, and it exploded in popularity, mainly on the back of a guy named Gorgeous George.
Yep, DuPont, all that business.
Yeah, the Dumont network, yes.
Yeah, whatever.
Not DuPont.
They're very similar.
It's a similar logo, too. And then the next huge spike in popularity was the mid-80s through around 1990 or so. There's no science to this.
Yeah, science.
The Hulk Hogan era, the cartoon era, the Saturday morning superstars era.
Known in the South as Hawk Hogan.
Yeah, Huck Hogan sometimes.
Huck Hogan, yes.
And like Quinn and I said in the beginning here, throughout every dip in those 3 tent poles that I'm using, the early part of the 20th century, the 50s and the 80s, wrestling, as Vince Russo was, wrestling, bro.
Bro, like, people don't watch wrestling for the wrestling, bro.
Always had its fans. When you get out of the wrestling bubble and you look at the just mainstream pop culture, like what's hot, what are the fads, wrestling wasn't it in the 70s.
No.
It wasn't it in the early and mid 90s. So even though us wrestling fans like ourselves,
Wrestling fans like myself, yes.
we can still look and appreciate a really, really good card or match from a dead year.
Or an angle.
Or an angle, or a wrestler.
If you don't know, an angle is a storyline.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't use these terms.
You're right. The insider jargon.
Yeah.
No, but you're
People
right.
are like,
Storyline.
what the hell angle? Like, what does he mean?
Like a right angle? Like an obtuse angle?
No, it's just a storyline.
The wrestling term is heels.
But the golden era is when the WWF, to our generations anyway, really transcended the niche, was in the pop culture. This is the 80s. And by that we mean, they're on MTV. They're doing all the appearances.
They're like superheroes and like they're on cartoons, and even the way it's presented, they're not conventional wrestlers. They're like guys that have like powers, basically. Like it's like got one guy's a macho man, one guy's a
warrior,
a snake.
Yeah, one guy is a snake.
One guy just has a straight up snake.
It's real.
Like one guy's a cop, but he's not really. But like we're not going to go into that detail. But like there's like everyone's a thing, and it's like okay, I get it. That's like why he's good or whatever, right?
Ultra cartoony, and to the wrestling purists, they hated it.
Right.
But here's the thing about critics and wrestling. Overall, whether we're talking 80s or 90s, mainstream pop culture and entertainment critics or sports writers never have a good word to say about wrestling.
Oh, not in any era. When it's good, nor when it's bad, it doesn't matter. It's always the same. It's fake, huh?
Right.
Like it's always the same shit every time.
They do drugs? Like, no shit.
Yeah, we know.
They do it in music too?
Right.
And like sports?
It's like, this is not unique to like, it doesn't matter how popular they get.
Look at that. This must be Gorilla's famous air punch. Boy, oh boy, he's so strong he can knock a guy down without even touching him.
It's just like this stigma, and I wish I could like dissect it almost. Like I don't fully understand why even to this day, now that there's like things like Comic-Con and things that are like nerdy that are popular and mainstream,
sure,
you would think wrestling, like and to an extent, wrestling has started to like graft itself onto that like Comic-Con kind of thing. Like,
and a lot of things.
You know what I mean?
YouTube culture, like look at Logan Paul.
Yeah, like they've tried to like. And to their credit, I think they do go to like even like I was just joking about Comic-Con, but like they do go to it now because they're just part of that.
Well, because the wrestler, the superstars, the entertainers are younger than we are.
Like if we're being honest, is it really that much of a stretch that Star Trek fans would like wrestling.
Oh, no.
And I'm not even kidding.
Well,
like,
you're one of them.
Yeah, I'm one of them. But I'm just saying, it's like in reality, like it's a nerdy kind of subculture thing.
Absolutely.
Right?
But as far as the 80s boom went, and again, we talked about this at episode 50, available in the archives, like any fad, it had a real high point, and then it slowly faded away. That's really not much different than anything else. Like Power Rangers were really hot. Now, they were on a long time, but when were they really popular? Only a couple of years?
I think the difference as far as wrestling and its popularity are concerned is that wrestling's a thing that while it was a fad like twice in its lifetime, like a really popular fad.
Or thrice if you count the 50s.
Yeah, maybe. It's something that they never stopped making it as far as like having matches at local arenas across the country. It never ever stopped.
It never ever stopped.
Right?
You're right
It's
about
like
that.
it's still going.
You're right about that. A lot of people say that the golden era ended around 1990. You and I would probably ascribe some of that. With Hulk Hogan losing for the first time to Ultimate Warrior, like putting him over.
Yeah,
clean.
that was kind of like they were like, okay, it's over. Like now there's going to be new wrestlers or whatever.
But from like a wrestling critic point of view, there was still some really good stuff through like 92. But in terms of the ratings, they were going down on NBC, which is why NBC eventually dropped them.
And to be fair, as far as their ratings are concerned, I feel like this was not that big of a thing in the 80s, right? Like
Not as much.
It was more about like how many pay-per-views did they sell?
Yes.
How big was the arena that they sold
Correct.
out? Like these were the milestones as far as numbers. Television is a 90s phenomenon with wrestling.
Yeah, and especially the WWF, their two cable shows that they had in
Right.
the 80s into the 90s were both ancillary shows. Like they weren't main shows. It was Primetime and All American.
Right. And as far as their big guns, their television shows that hit hard and, they have great rating records or whatever, it's their Saturday Night's Main Event program.
Exactly.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Ooh, yeah. Revenge for Elizabeth. Vengeance will be mine on Saturday Night's Main Event.
But they still did, respectable cable ratings into the 90s. They were still widespread on syndication. They were still selling tickets, but they were back in the niche. Now, no offense to one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, but Bret Hart was not known in the pop culture the way Hulk Hogan was just a household
He
name.
was known in the pop culture later for something else that happened.
That's a little bit different. Yeah.
Yes, not for being a wrestler.
Correct, correct. But I'm going to draw a quick comparison for some music fans, and I know you'll pick up on the reference, Quinn. Remember Green Day when they came out with Dookie in 94?
Yeah, Dookie.
Yeah, Dookie. And Dookie was everywhere.
Right, everyone liked the Dookie.
It was all over the place.
But golden CD, Joe.
What?
Golden Dookie.
Ernie was on the back initially. They had a bunch of hit singles from it, like When I Come Around, Basket Case. People knew who Green Day were.
They did.
And then their follow-up came out, Insomniac, about a year later, and I bet you can't even name a single song from Insomniac.
No,
Have you
not
ever
at
heard
all.
of Insomniac?
'Cause I only had the Dookie CD that I put in my Discman.
Exactly.
And played it a lot. It's again, this also has to do with like the internet and stuff too.
It does.
It's like there wasn't the internet.
Now, did you hear their follow-up, Nimrod?
I've heard of that.
That's okay. You heard of it.
I've heard of it, but it's again, I wasn't like Mr. Green Day. I'm sure there were Green Day.
Oh, you mean you
people.
were a casual?
Yeah,
fan.
I like the album that was popular.
Exactly. The 80s was Dookie. This is just a quick comparison. You could do this with a lot of different
The
bands.
80s was Dookie.
The 80s was Dookie. The early 90s was, Insomniac, Nimrod. Still had some critically acclaimed stuff
Right.
within its circle, but it wasn't until American Idiot.
American Idiot's like it's
The
90s.
Attitude
That's
Era,
like the
yeah.
90s of Green Day, right?
Yes.
Yeah. If we're comparing it to wrestling 90s, obviously it was like 2001 or whatever.
Of course,
it was.
2004.
Yeah.
But that's the point we're trying to make is that if you're a fan of Green Day, you probably love Insomniac. You probably love stuff on Nimrod, the stuff that the critics ignored from Warning. But you know that in the mainstream, they were really popular with Dookie in 94 and American Idiot in 2004. And
Right.
that's very similar to the Golden Era and the Attitude Era, for example.
And even for like, it's even a good comparison to wrestling too. It's because of how Green Day, marketed and advertised the album. It changed the look and feel of what they were doing.
Absolutely.
Or the sound,
All of it.
Yeah,
All of
and
it.
they said, okay, we're different now. We're hip. We're cool. We're like part of the zeitgeist, right?
That's literally what happened. For example, with wrestling, in 1994, if you asked somebody who the WWF champion was, the layman on the street, you know who they'd say?
Yeah,
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
Who was the champion in that for? Yoko, Brett?
Yeah.
It wasn't.
I mean, Hulk Hogan was a champion elsewhere in 1994.
Right, but that's the point I'm trying to make is like people didn't know about wrestling in the mainstream the way they did in the 80s. And some things happened around that year, 94. And this is where the WWF's buy rates are lower than they have ever been.
Right. Buy rates is like how many people bought the pay-per-view if you're at home. Like,
exactly.
What the hell's a buy rate? Yeah.
Their attendance is way down. I mean, you've seen some of the venues they were running on those Raws.
So like this is
Bushkill.
Yeah, so this is the
Poconos.
This is the interesting part. As a fan of professional wrestling, there was this cool little period, right, in this dumpy, like crappy period where you could go to like a local armory or like Lions Club or something. VFW. The guys that were on TV would be there either doing autographs or actually wrestling.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is so weird, right? It's like you could literally go to your like local dump, and this is how like they just could not draw anyone to come see this shit, right?
Yep.
And you'd go there, and everyone would be excited because you're like, wow, these. Because to me, what made that special in this period was that you felt like you were seeing television stars in your neighborhood,
correct?
Right? But also it's a double-edged sword. It's like nobody. Like they're
probably getting paid $18 for that.
Right, it's terrible.
It's bad
right,
for business, but good for a fan.
Good for the fans, right?
You can go to your local high school and watch
it's
a
like,
card.
I saw that guy on TV yesterday. He said he's like 3 blocks from my house. Like,
it's so funny though.
How about a chance to sit in the graveyard section decorated by this tombstone? This is where the Undertaker's supernatural powers are at their greatest, and you can register to win free tickets at PC Richard and Sons.
Some things happened, though, in the mid-'90s that kicked off. Like, they were just like little kindles, little fire starters for what would become the boom. One of them is Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling, the biggest competitor to Vince McMahon's WWF.
And
they signed up Hulk Hogan in June of 1994.
Right here, I've got the contract. I'm going to have you with your John Henry.
John Henry!
And they also, by the end of the year, had Randy Savage and some other notable faces from the Golden Era, such as Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Right. So WCW's strategy, unlike the WWF's, was, hey, that worked over there. We'll import it over here, but we have a little more money than them because we're part of a big corporation. We can make it look nice and give it a budget and shit, right? It was basically take what was working that was like a guaranteed, like, we know these guys will draw attendance.
Yep.
And then scale it up in, its funding, essentially.
And to their credit, it did work. Now, it may not have, again, the wrestling pundit, appreciation.
Right.
But it did help get eyes on the product.
Right.
It really did help elevate their
status. So there was this little burst of popularity. I remember it in the mainstream where it was like, hey, did you hear that Hulk Hogan is going to another wrestling federation? That's how people said it back then. They didn't say, this is back then. It's like federation, right? You think, oh, they're like little like sports organizations or something. Like, this is what I thought.
Yeah, sure.
It was like, oh, Hulk Hogan's moving from one federation to the next.
Exactly.
Right? And this felt like a big deal.
Exactly right. Vince McMahon, because he had no mainstream stars anymore, he promoted the new generation. And anyone that lived through that will know this. There was some good wrestling, without a doubt. I mean, both of our favorite wrestlers came of age there, right, in the new generation. But there was nothing cool nor mainstream about the new generation.
Right. As we like to say, the new generation was code for we don't have the guys that you know anymore.
Right. So we're going to make fun of those guys.
Right. And then promote these new guys that you've never heard of.
Right. Basically. Like Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart.
Yeah.
These are not household names.
Or guys that were like lower on the card back in the 80s. Like that was like the guys that were not a big deal.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, Vince in the WWF did try to capture lightning in a bottle for 1995's WrestleMania 11 by bringing in recently retired NFL New York Giant Lawrence Taylor.
Football legend Lawrence Taylor takes on wrestling superstar Bam Bam Bigelow in the wildest sporting event of the year.
To one end, it did get a lot of eyeballs on the product.
I think this did good in the New York market specifically because it was a New York Giants player, right?
Yes, he was well known.
As somebody born and raised in New Jersey, this was like, wow, Lawrence Taylor's on wrestling? Like, this is crazy, right? It's actually brought me in because that was like when I was first starting to watch.
That's
right?
true.
It was like I heard about LT.
Yep.
I saw in the local news, not the national, that, hey, guy on our team, he got in a fight with this guy at the wrestling and now he's going to fight him? Like, what?
It was a good promotion.
Right.
They really did put a lot of thought and heart into it. And LT, damn did he try. But here's the problem. It got a lot of eyeballs on the product, but WrestleMania 11 may have been the worst time to show more people how bad your show is.
Right. So The problem with this show, obviously, is like it's the main event with LT is so much fun. It's great to watch. The rest of this show is garbage. Like, it's bad.
It's like inviting people over for dinner when your kitchen's being renovated.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
don't show this.
Yeah.
Like, literally, if you watch the show as a wrestling fan, you know what to look for. It's a bunch of crap that all these people are ordering this and it did a really good buy rate.
New York Giants football fans, right? They're like, I want to see if LT's going to win, right?
It's like, to endure this entire horrible
this
show.
horrible shit, right?
And why would you turn back in? Like, why would you tune in for that the next night ever? But anyway, nobody gave a flying ass about the WWF in general in 95 or 6. Now, again, to be fair, WCW had a couple of glimpses, but they weren't mainstream either in 95 and 6. They had some glimpses, though. But then something happened beginning in May of 1996 and following the next couple of months that turned the wrestling world on its ear, but one component of it even had people buzzing, and that was something called the New World Order.
Yes. What is this New World Order? Because you might have like heard of this, even like if you weren't a wrestling fan, like you might have seen the shirts or like heard of like what is going on. Like there's like, so the way it was presented on television, right? If you were, not a mainstream person, it was presented like the guys from the WWF Federation were coming to the WCW Federation, but that it was like renegade or something, like it wasn't official, right? This is how it was presented, right? That they were invading. They couldn't say that they were because of contracts and laws and legal reasons. They couldn't say like we're from there and we're coming to beat up these guys in the rival federation, right?
But they hinted at it.
You people, what's with him? You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here.
And the way it was presented is one of them came out of the crowd on the first night and he gave a speech basically saying like, you know that I'm like from there.
Yeah, we're taking over.
We're taking over, this and that. And then next week, another one came.
This is where the big boys play, huh? Look at the adjective, play. We ain't here to play.
They were like, we got a third guy, right? Like another guy's coming from WWF. And like this is, as far as it was so much fun to watch because I remember the build up and everyone saying like, is it going to be? Is it going to be like you're kind of looking at the WWF, right? And you're saying like, oh man, is it going to be like Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels or like it could be anybody, right? It's like you didn't know.
You didn't know who it was going to be. It's also important to mention before we get to the big reveal here that this had been playing out on Monday Nitro, and there's a reason that's important. So in January of 93, the WWF changed their Monday show from primetime wrestling, which had been on since 85, to a live, most of the time, show.
Right, every couple weeks it was live.
Yeah, called Monday Night Raw. It was initially not their main show, but by 94, 95, it was, right?
Because they did, even in this lull, they had some success with this, right?
They did.
It's like their ratings were higher.
Yes, their cable ratings were great for Raw. Very, very good on USA Network. So the same Ted Turner, and Eric Bischoff, who was running WCW, they wanted to compete with that. And this was unprecedented. So head-to-head, starting in September of 95, was WCW's similarly named Monday Nitro.
Right.
Now, these guys were going back and forth and volleying ratings wins with each other.
Right. So a lot of what was going on prior to the NWO thing was every week they were trying to one-up each other. So, like, for example, you would see, like, world title matches in like the main event, which back in those days it was only reserved for pay-per-view. Like you had to buy it.
Yeah, or buy a ticket somewhere.
Because now the object is not to sell the pay-per-view, the object is to get the better rating. So now there's like this incentive, and competition always makes things better, right?
Absolutely.
In anything. So it's like there's this incentive. So now every week each of them are trying like, oh, we got to have our best match. We got to have our best wrestlers. And like a show that was usually reserved for some good wrestler beats up some nobody wrestler, just tons of these crappy matches. Suddenly it's good wrestler versus good wrestler.
All the time.
Like all the time. The best wrestlers fighting every week on Mondays.
So this actually forces WWF to change their strategy.
Right.
But then when this NWO came in May of 96, WCW started winning this ratings war on a consistent basis. In July of 96 at the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, the third man was revealed. Who was joining these two WWF outsiders, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall?
Hulk Hogan, turning bad.
Hulk Hogan arrived. Hulk. What is he doing? My God!
trade WCW. He is the third man.
Look at this
picture.
Oh my God! What the hell is going on? Oh my God!
This was like the spark that lit the whole like new boom, in my opinion.
It really was.
Because for years and years and years,
12 of them,
Hulk Hogan was exclusively a good guy.
Yeah.
He was America's hero. That was his character, right?
Absolutely,
like on television, and even to the mainstream, he was a hero.
Red and yellow, prayers, training, vitamins.
And I think that the best example of like how awesome this worked out is that Hulk Hogan, he beats up all the good guys and everyone's gasping and blah, blah, blah. And then people start throwing garbage in the ring. And like, I'd never seen that at a wrestling show. And WCW, to their credit, they didn't like get security and start like throwing people out, like be like, hey, you can't throw things. Because usually you're not supposed to do that.
You're
right?
not supposed
they
to.
They let it just happen organically and they didn't police it.
It's a great visual.
And basically, it's just you see like people throwing sodas and like people are so fucking pissed off that Hulk Hogan turned bad. And he's cutting this promo about how nobody respected him and that this is... and then he gave a name to it. The New World Order, although he said organization.
You can call this the New World Order of Wrestling, brother. For 2 years, I held my head high. I did everything for the charities. I did everything for the kids. And the reception I got when I came out here, you fans can stick it, brother. Because if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, you people wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff would be still selling meat from a truck in Minneapolis. And if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, all these Johnny-come-latelys that you see out here, wrestling wouldn't be here. I was selling out the world, brother, while they were bumming gas to put in their car to get to high school. So the way it is now, brother, with Hulk Hogan and the New World Organization of Wrestling, brother, me and the new blood by my side, what you gonna do when the New World Organization runs wild on you? What you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Don't touch me, I'm gonna flee the lawyers.
But what this did, it didn't immediately, it wasn't like, all of a sudden wrestling doubled its ratings and attendance. But what it did is it definitely lit a fire in the wrestling scene, but also it pushed WCW in a darker, edgier direction.
More adult.
Yes. No longer were they imitating 1987 WWF.
Right.
This was fresh. I mean, in a way, they were imitating ECW, but they're not part of this discussion because they weren't mainstream. I'm sorry, but they really weren't mainstream.
Well, they'll come into the picture later where WWF fires back and their influences, but yes.
Yes, but they weren't mainstream.
Right.
But what happened was, like you said, more adult. There's more the 18 to 34 demo.
So, so the idea of this bad Hulk Hogan thing, and I don't know if they predicted this, if they knew, like, this is how the public would receive it, was that at first, like, for the first couple weeks, they were getting booed and all that, like, everyone hated them.
Oh, yeah,
Like, they were, like, spray painting stuff, and they were in all black, and they looked cool and shit.
And they kept adding members.
And then suddenly, and I can never determine when this happened, because it was, to their credit, it was very organic. Suddenly, you start looking in the crowd, and more people have NWO shirts on than they do, any of their favorite WCW wrestlers.
Yeah, and they're cheering the NWO.
Right. And so basically, this just got cool. People thought it was cool.
There's no other word for it.
And, a lot of people will criticize WCW for this, but I personally don't, because they were going with the headwinds. If everyone wants to buy NWO shirts, give them more NWO, right? Until nobody wants it anymore.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. So eventually, the WWF, and this is in the same year, 1996, where the WWF had a plumber wrestling. Now we love Tony Anthony.
We love Tony. That's the guy who played the plumber.
Yeah, they had a guy in a mask named Who.
Yeah,
they had Salvatore Sincere.
Let's just say it was crap.
It's crap.
It was just a bunch of junk. Like
nobody cared. Like outside of their little tiny bubble.
Yeah,
their little bubble. Nobody
itty bitty bubble by this point.
Shawn Michaels was in Playgirl, but that wasn't enough for mainstream.
Right.
Playgirl. So, I mean, it's not enough for mainstream.
WWF, to their credit, with some of this stuff, the one thing I respected during this period where they were on the back foot, they were responding to WCW.
Oh, they were on their heels. Yeah,
it wasn't as frequent because they were still trying to figure out like how do we respond to this?
What do we do?
Things like Bret Hart on talk shows, or like Shawn Michaels in play, or like somebody on Mad TV or something.
Yeah, it was a little later, but
they were like trying to figure out a groove, like how do we like compete with this, right?
Yes.
And I actually like the chaos of that.
I do too.
Looking back,
we always talk about how late '96 is a lot of fun.
Right.
That is when they started changing things up as well, because they had to, because their product wasn't selling the way it used to. One of the things they did, and we don't need to get into detail on this, but they had an angle storyline where a guy pulled a gun at someone's house because he broke in.
Right,
Brian Pillman and Steve Austin.
All right, we heard Stone Cold Steve Austin outside. He's been making his way around all the way to the back of the house, screaming and yelling. Pillman's got this pistol out, and I don't know what the hell is going on here. This is ridiculous. Pillman's got this. What the hell is that?
Did somebody call the police?
and I think it's time to kind of bring Steve Austin in the picture. And I think a lot of mainstream people know who he is, right?
Stone Cold.
In 1996, a wrestler came in, Stone Cold. He wasn't Stone Cold Steve Austin. He came in as another like name or whatever, right?
He said "man" a lot in that one promo.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here, man. Champion, man. Man, I'm in the Royal Rumble, man. Over that rope right there, man. But in WrestleMania, man.
Hey, man.
He comes in within only like a couple of months. He's kind of like, we retroactively watched this. We're chronologically covering it on our other show.
Yes.
And right away, like once he gets his footing and he's like just Stone Cold Steve Austin, and it only takes
it's a few months.
It's a few months.
It's not long.
He kind of like ignites like a fire, like a little like spark.
He's disruptive.
He's disruptive, right? And this coincides with other guys coming in, like Mankind, right?
Yes, who was a cult favorite on ECW,
right?
And had been in WCW.
Who's given the Undertaker a run for his money,
correct?
Right? And so you got this Stone Cold, and you got this Mankind, and suddenly a little itty bitty snowball.
Yeah,
starts.
little by little,
right? But the Stone Cold kind of went faster.
Oh yeah,
than Mankind did, right?
Yeah.
The Stone Cold thing, basically, he kept like disrupting the show. Like he was basically like, "No, I'm the best guy here. F you guys."
Yeah.
And he would say this to people who were like clearly bigger stars than him. And
like
I think
Bret Hart.
This is where they started to finally like understand. They were getting some of that WCW fire, right?
Exactly.
That it was like this rebellious, like he doesn't say the best. He's not the nicest guy. He's not a good guy,
right?
But people like it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, they like him anyway.
We have rules and regulations here, and you've broken every one of them.
Because I don't care about them.
Well,
what are you going to do
what
about
I'm
it?
gonna do. I want you to get your ass out of this building right now.
Nobody
Go
talk
out
to me
there,
like that.
Get some
Don't
food
talk to me
and
like that.
calm down.
I'll whip their ass, dude.
I want you out of here.
Don't you
get out.
And so he was a major component of this. Meanwhile, as we get into 97, the WCW was thrusting itself into mainstream situations with better success than the WWF and LT. I'm talking about Dennis Rodman wrestling on their pay-per-views.
As stupid as that sounds, I mean, if you're this is like the reverse LT, right? It's bringing in an LT figure when it actually matters.
He was on the Bulls.
Right, yeah. He was on the Bulls, like the 98 Bulls or whatever. The 90s.
Yeah, and the 97.
Yeah.
He was playing basketball at the time.
Right.
Like literally at the time.
And as stupid as it sounds, they got Jay Leno to show up to
the next year. I mean, listen, as derided as that is for a wrestling match, and rightfully so.
Hey, for a mainstream audience, it's like, wow, Jay Leno's going to, like...
People watch him every night.
Right, they're like, he's going to get in the ring?
Now Hogan's down, and Jay Leno, full arm dragon twist. Another one. Drags Hogan to the mat. Oh, you gotta love it.
They got Karl Malone, another basketball player.
Yeah.
They got Kyle Petty. Oh, all right. But
and they started to have a couple of hits with other stars like Diamond Dallas Page.
Yes.
Chris Jericho.
And then, of course, at the end of 97, Bill Goldberg.
Yeah.
I mean, undefeated
there was just a lot speckled into this. They were getting little, like, maybe for the next generation after the NWO, right? They were getting, like, little bursts of, like, oh, this guy's good. Oh, and that guy's good, right?
So by 1997, the WWF finally went full steam ahead with changing its direction, and they took on much more of a WCW/ECW-esque tone. They changed it into their show to Raw is War.
Right. So if you don't know what ECW is, I consider ECW like underneath all of this, right?
They're the grunge rock of wrestling.
They're the grunge rock, right? They're the undertone. They're the muse. They're the influence, right?
In certain ways, they really are.
What ECW was doing if you don't know what it is, it was like a very small promotion in the Philadelphia area, but it was very experimental.
Oh yeah,
I think is the best word for it, and it had a guy named Paul Heyman at the helm, writing and
accentuating,
directing it,
directing, producing,
right, and essentially this guy was actually very smart,
extremely.
He knew how to get a rise out of the public, and they had like a cult following because of this. But what you started to see, what showed the influence of this is both in WCW and in WWF, a lot of the ideas were repackaged and repurposed, and some of the edginess stripped out because, again, they could do what they wanted to do in ECW. There was no censors, or they weren't big enough that anybody would notice.
They were barely on TV.
So, there was some really edgy, screwed ups. They were just, they would try anything, and there was avant-garde wrestling.
It really was.
Right?
It was like post-punk over there.
Right,
it was
yeah,
crazy.
it was like, we don't give a shit, we'll just try it, right? But over, they had to make it more mainstream at the top.
Shine it up
so a
real
lot
nice.
of these ideas were circulating. Right?
Yeah, and the overall tone, I think, if nothing else, was imported to both companies. So just a certain grit that hadn't been there previously.
And what ECW was on the pulse with, what I think they understood better and what the other two learned from them, is they understood what the mainstream culture was into.
Yeah, the actual culture of the time.
Howard Stern and Jerry Springer and that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
It's like this...
And the music culture,
the
too.
The music culture and this, movies were more violent and so that there was more brawling and stuff, basically they were taking all these, looking around them and taking all the mainstream culture and subculture and mixing it into professional wrestling. And that's the idea that leaked up.
Exactly. Right? Even though it itself wasn't, a worldwide phenomenon, ECW was very integral to all of this. So by 1997, as we get into 1998, it's worth mentioning that WCW has still been the clear ratings winner ever since, I believe it was June of 1996, offhand. But it's also worth mentioning, and we're covering this period right now. We just finished 97.
Yeah, over on our Patreon show.
Yep. WWF's business is picking up,
right?
Which is a good sign. WCW's has been great the whole time,
but we got to note one thing here. Even though their business is picking up, all of wrestling is picking up.
Exactly.
I think now is a good time to talk about the ratings, because the ratings started to the end of 97 into
now
98.
They're in the fours, both shows.
Yeah, they're higher than they've ever been.
Correct. It was a good rating in 95 when they had a 3.
Right.
Now Nitro's constantly above 4.
They're both in this position where they need their rating to be higher every week. This is the golden period to me when they are just looking for fans everywhere, right?
Yes.
They're doing whatever they can because they're in a dead heat for who's going to be the number one wrestling. Right.
WWF fans like myself will say that the WWF product, was superior by this period of time, and that's certainly a matter of taste and opinion, so we don't need to discuss that.
It's not to say WCW didn't have its moments, too.
It definitely did, don't get me wrong. One of the things WWF did was make a fella who had been with them for several years as a magazine writer and then joined the creative team. They made him head writer in 1997.
Right, and this is I feel like
this does matter.
This got their edginess up, because this was a guy, Vince Russo was his name.
And Vince Russo was my name, bro.
And he understood the mainstream culture like Paul Heyman did.
And he understood what WCW was doing,
and he could
too.
put his own spin on those ideas and
yes.
bring it in, right?
Now, he's a very controversial figure if you're really into wrestling, but if you're not, the bare bones point is he did help.
Right.
Plain and simple.
One thing he understood, and this is something, the other promotion, WCW, was run by Eric Bischoff, and he was a television person. And,
he was more of a overall executive type.
But what Bischoff understood, but more importantly, Russo also understood, was how do you program the show? What do you do into the commercial breaks and then coming out of the commercial breaks? How do you time your commercial break? All of this little stuff. What matches do you put in what order to gain the maximum amount of viewers? Right?
It is true. we've been watching these Monday Night Raws in between doing our Patreon reviews. But what Vince Russo started doing is weaving in God forbid, a story throughout an entire program, not just good match, good match, good match, good match.
So sometimes in episodes you'd see a backstage segment, for example, that the whole show you were following it. The gun thing was an early example of it, but there's plenty of other storylines where it's like, this episode is about, I don't know, Stone Cold doesn't like this guy. And
Bret Hart, let's say, in the ambulance.
Yeah, and he's really angry about him, and maybe it starts off softly. Maybe there's a promo at the beginning of the night, which is like an interview segment.
Yeah, it's where they do a monologue.
There's other segments where Stone Cold maybe he's looking for Bret Hart, or Bret Hart's looking for him, or something. There's an undertone in between the matches, right? And by the end, it escalates into some big blow up at the end, you know, and he attacks him in the ambulance, or you know,
it shouldn't be novel, but that's like TV 101. You know what I mean? Like, you get a hook and you want people to keep watching and not change the channel.
Uniqueness to wrestling was, I think that ambulance thing is a great example, right? Bret the Hitman Hart got hurt.
Yep.
But then at the end of the night, who attacks him on the guy that has been looking for him all night is Stone Cold,
his arch rival.
Right, exactly. It's that idea of like, hey, there's other stuff going on and we can interconnect it.
And
right?
that was what started happening in 97.
Right.
And that's important. The reason we're mentioning that is from a television viewing point of view.
Yeah. Because you're never lost if you're a mainstream audience. You're like, you might not know anything about these people. You turn on one episode. I remember they were very good at this.
Mm-hmm.
By the end, you understood every single story at the end of every episode, and you were like, oh, now I want to watch next week, right?
Yes, when they were doing this right, that's exactly what it was. So at the end of 1997, again, very brief bullet point here, the Montreal Screwjob happened. That is somewhat known in culture because it's where a legitimate thing happened where Bret Hart thought the ending was going to go one way. It happened a different way. Vince McMahon was the ultimate culprit of this, right? He pulled the trigger, so to speak.
As the boss of the place.
Yeah, and that did raise rumblings in both companies.
But I think also, this to me is a touchstone moment in all of this,
It is.
right? Because I think this added another element. For the first time, people were more aware of the realities of a scripted program, if that makes sense. Like
the ramifications of
that there are realities to it. That not everything you see is fake.
Yes,
and both of them started. This was already going on with the NWO. They were trying to kind of do this, but the Bret Hart almost accidentally ripped it wide open.
Yeah,
right. To the point of they both started capitalizing on this.
Absolutely.
Right, is that they were both acknowledging that the wrestlers in real life are jockeying for popularity.
Correct.
And they're trying to raise their star.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, but they're working within the inner workings of this fake storyline and that they're trying to stand out when they get their moments.
There
right?
you go. Yeah.
And this kind of became the undertone of all of it, right?
I think that's a fair analysis, Quinn.
And I think that made it more popular.
It did, and when
the audience understood
when
this.
the audience understood that, what it also did is it set the stage for Vince McMahon to be an on-screen character, which we'll talk about in a second. But I need to rewind back a little. In June of 1997, something somewhat unrelated happened, but ultimately wound up really mattering. Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear, was eventually suspended from boxing in most jurisdictions, and was a very controversial and hot button name. So in January,
he jived right with the culture too at the time. This rebellious and
he bit a piece of his fucking ear.
He bit an ear off. What the baddest man on the planet, right? It's
Yes.
like, wow, this is crazy.
And the WWF did a retread of what they had done with Lawrence Taylor, except they did it right.
Right, exactly. So the right meaning, I'm going to say this again. What they did, like the execution of Lawrence Taylor wasn't bad. It was when they did it.
It was when they did it,
right?
yeah.
It was like now we're doing it when the product is developed and
Correct.
like it's good.
Much better. So they bring in Mike Tyson in January of 1998. This gets eyes on the product.
Now this got mainstream. People were like, Mike Tyson. He's fighting somebody.
He's going to fight Stone Cold.
He's going to fight or something, right? It's like they were teasing, right?
Do I think you could beat my ass? Hell no. Do I think I could beat your ass? Why, hell yeah. I don't know how good your hearing is, but if you don't understand what I'm saying, I always got a little bit of sign language, so here's to you.
Whoa!
So he gets in a confrontation with Austin,
Right.
Steve Austin.
The most rebellious badass. This worked brilliantly for them because it was like their badass character versus another known badass, Mike Tyson, right?
And suddenly around this time, the WWF is pulling very close to WCW on the Monday night ratings, but it's not because WCW went down.
Right.
It's because WWF was going up.
And what does that tell you? It tells you wrestling as a whole is getting more and more popular.
Exactly.
It's a land grab. The whole situation is just a land grab, right?
Yes.
Because it's an expanding audience, and these are new viewers. What are they going to pick on Monday night? Are they going to pick Monday Nitro? Or are they going to pick Monday Night Raw? Or are they going to flip?
Are they going to flip?
And
right?
which one will they stay on the longest?
Exactly.
Right?
That's what was going on. This time, the product that was behind the Mike Tyson thing, like the actual like meat and potatoes of what the WWF was doing, was much more intriguing to the audience that was tuning in than it had been in 1995. Because now we've got show-long threads going on. We've got new characters and weird situations. It's edgy. It's dark. It's not hokey. 95 is hokey.
Yeah. And even, I think, a great example of like how they like made it not hokey is you look at like The Undertaker. Like he's the epitome of like a hokey character.
Oh, he's an epitome, Quinn.
Right? He's an undead zombie wizard man. It's like he doesn't make any sense. Like he's just like
none of it's.
But people think it's cool, right?
Yes.
But like they started like make him realistic, right? Like they brought in his brother, and now he's like emotionally like, I don't know if I want to fight my brother. Like, and it's like, oh wait, The Undertaker's like a person like who wrestles. Like this is cool, right?
They got all sorts of edgy shit going on. They got
Shawn Michaels and D-Generation X.
Yeah.
These guys that are literally like, we're the rule breakers or whatever.
Suck it and stuff
Suck
and
it
penis and
yeah, we're saying
fart.
We're saying all the things that like you're not supposed to say on television, right? That's like how they marketed it.
We promise there will be less dick references. Oh, shit. Watch your fucking mouth. Well, fuck me. God damn it. Fuck.
They had
Goldust and Luna with the S&M weird
Goldust
shit.
acting like a weird performance artist,
with
like,
Yoko Ono, I think,
right?
we called
And
it.
like again, it's just all these ideas, and like you would turn them on, and they were like the circus. Like there was some for everyone, right? It was like you like the New Age Outlaws, like the tag champions who are like kind of they talk shit and like they're like they have like a big speech and everyone can say it. They just had like a thing. Like there was always a thing.
You got this boxer guy, Mark Merrill, with his hot girlfriend,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
She's supposed to be, or what? Did they say it's not a wife, right?
They never really say.
Not then.
All you're supposed to know at home is she's hot.
She's hot.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
it.
It's true. And basically the point we're trying to make is this fit in with the rest of the culture? Because what was going on in the culture? We've already talked about Jerry Springer, but scandals were very popular.
Right.
You know, Bill Clinton, right?
Right.
Who doesn't love a good scandal?
Also sports scandals like Mike Tyson, right?
Also the baseball and the steroids and all the things, right? And a show known as South Park. For some reason, South Park and wrestling hit at the same time.
They were the same kind of, because it was just the culture. That's all it is. It's like it was this idea. There was, I always felt the prevailing like thought process going on in the culture, specifically with like entertainment and television at the time.
Yeah,
was the audience had started to have a hunger for this concept of like, that you can't do that on television. They wanted to see that broken, right? You had that with Ellen with coming out on TV, or you had all sorts of things that you're not supposed to do.
NYPD Blue with a butt or whatever.
Yeah, NYPD. Like
you see the butt.
Everything that was going on in television was about breaking the rules, and wrestling became about breaking the rules, and that's why it adapted, right?
Because for so long it had been perceived as like this goody two shoes wholesome. That's for kids. There's dolls and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like that type of shit, which it was in Ronald Reagan's America. But now we're in Bill Clinton's America, baby. And now
we have sex scandals in the White House.
He's getting impeached for the damn shit, right? And the other thing that happens within the wrestling thing, this does matter because it, again, permeates the culture, is in April of 1998, on the heels of a show-long storyline, which had been building since September of 97, where Steve Austin, the new champion, is going to fight Vince McMahon, now known as the owner, on screen.
Right. So we got to say this, too. It's like, this is where it kept getting crazier for the WWF.
This is a norm being broken.
The fallout and really the what they took from the whole Bret Hart incident that we just laid out, right, is that this hunger for, we want to see behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
And what they did is they slowly but surely converted the owner of the company, who is not a wrestler, Vince McMahon, into a full-fledged character who may or may not fight someone in the ring.
And it was brilliantly done because if you're a wrestling fan, you know what that all means. But if you were one of the newer fans that was picked up by Mike Tyson's appearances, it's a classic story of the billionaire or millionaire boss against the blue-collar, average guy.
Right. It was presented like a angered employee fantasy or something,
yes.
right? Like this idea that you could beat up your boss,
yes.
right? And that's how it was presented, and the viewing public ate it up.
It's pretty awesome, though, that the way it was able to be on the heels of Mike Tyson, because undoubtedly, Quinn, Tyson brought them some mainstream attention that they desperately needed.
Yeah.
But it's just a remarkable feat that they followed it up with something that kept people.
Right.
And then kept hooking them. And by April, it was April 13th, 1998, WWF, after 83 weeks, won the ratings war. And now at this point, for the rest of the year, and then it becomes irrelevant, honestly, by 99. But WWF and WCW still battling back and forth, but now WWF with the upper hand. But again, not because WCW was going down yet.
Like I said, I think what we've talked about here and what we've kind of bandied about is that I think the reason neither of them were slipping or obviously one could go ahead of the other, but I'm saying the audience was still expanding in 1998.
Yes.
So it was still, it was whatever the hell a new viewer landed on, basically.
Yes.
And any given Monday, somebody could get 10,000 more viewers than the other guy because maybe that week one of them had a more compelling thing.
Exactly.
Right?
And sometimes they would bring in people like the Insane Clown Posse and things of the culture. Right. Or I remember Howard Stern's Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf, weird shit.
Well, both of them were just now it was just we got to get we have to let people know that this is going to happen or that's going to happen. You got to turn to TNT or you got to turn to USA because this or that is going to happen on the next show, right?
Now, we should clarify, because we have our wrestling fans listening, we have our non-wrestling fans listening. We are well aware that the wrestling in the ring during this period of time is not for the purists.
Nobody cared. Let's be honest.
True, because what we're talking here are shorter matches, titles being less important, more backstage skits, right? Very short attention span content. Everything was very in short bursts, very outlandish.
It was programmed for television.
Correct. Hey, a porn star, a pimp, someone driving a Zamboni, a car getting crushed with cement, some guy yelling, suck it, something with fire. Hey, there's boobs over there. But that is what kept people going because nothing got stale. Listen, it might be critically derided within wrestling, right? But critics don't pay the bills. It's like in baseball, Quinn. A good game, like a good pitcher's duel versus...
Nobody gives a shit about that.
Griffey and McGuire.
They want to see
bombs.
the home runs.
Exactly. And who wins? Plus, by the way, like we said at the top of the show, the critics never acclaimed wrestling anyway in the mainstream. You know, the most they would ever give was the begrudging praise of, it makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
That's a good gate.
Right.
Yeah. Some shit like that.
The highest it ever got is it does well. We hate to say it.
I feel like both of them realized during this boom period, I feel like both of them were we don't fucking care. We're making a lot of money here.
Right.
We don't give a shit what you think.
Listen, again, if you're the hardcore wrestling fan, and Quinn and I have been through phases, and we've been all over the wrestling internet for 25 years each, right? We understand.
As much as the people criticize, I never got the high like I got during this time period. The elation when you would know that, the credits to Walker, Texas Ranger, and
Feel it. WWF Raw. Next on USA.
Oh my God, it's coming on. What's going to happen, right? Or whatever the hell came on before Nitro. Even.
I don't even know what it was, actually.
I would just tune in, though, still, because sometimes Nitro was an hour before, sometimes it was at the same time. It depended on the time period.
There were things.
But the point was, it was man, it's Monday night, and I got to get my wrestling.
Absolutely, Quinn.
I don't want to be at school tomorrow and not know, what Stone Cold did or what Sting or the NWO did. I want to know. And I'm sure this went on at the water cooler at people's jobs, too,
It
right?
probably did, and here's the thing. In 94, people wanted their wrestling. However, a million or two people.
Mm-hmm.
By 1998 and 99, we are talking upwards of 8, 9, 10 million people
Think of it
on
this
a
way.
Monday.
I mean, like combined, they're doing between an 8 and a 10.
That's what I'm saying.
Right? Is like that's insane for cable. Like
it is for cable.
Yeah.
For cable. But here's the other thing: people were also paying for it. Their buy rates went way, way up in '98 and '99 and 2000. The highest of which was WrestleMania X7 in April of 2001, over 1 million for that. Absurd. But I want to just let's figure this out, Quinn. I have an anecdotal story, but maybe you can help me fit this together. It was about a year before I knew you, when I was in 7th grade. Okay, because we met in 8th grade. At the end of 6th grade, which is for me ended in June of '98. At the very end, people were starting to get into wrestling.
Yes.
But before that, in the beginning of 6th grade, in '97 still, they were like, "You like wrestling?"
Right. I remember this switch.
After the summer of 6th grade, the summer of '98, right? The Highway to Hell summer, the home run chase summer, whole summer, right?
Yeah. 1998 is such a great year in
I
general.
know, I love that. We should do an episode of '98 one day.
Even the video games, like everything's
all of
good.
it's good.
Yeah.
September '98 hits. Now every kid in my class is a fucking wrestling fan.
Right. That was what it was. And I assume too, if you were an adult, again, I really think this is true because of the demo, that you went to the workplace and suddenly it wasn't, hey, let's talk about the baseball game, or what. Suddenly there was people coming to the water cooler or
See
the
Raw
break
last
room
night?
and like, did you see WWF Raw last night?
See what Stone Cold did?
Did you see what The Rock did, or like whatever? Like, or did you see what the NWO did?
Who cares?
Because people were watching both.
They still
That's
were
the
in
thing.
90
It's
in
like,
98, yes.
Can you believe Sting came from the roof?
Right,
like, you know, like that. Like people knew what was going on
You're
on
right.
both of the shows.
This is the one thing that I think the really hardcore wrestling purists miss sometimes, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is that people were talking about it the way a fan of a television serial drama or comedy or adventure show or
Game
action.
of Thrones, Sopranos, like that. All of that
Yes.
shit, right? Is like, yeah.
That is when it connects with people, when they're willing to follow it. Listen, good matches don't draw the
Right.
mainstream.
Right.
They just
They want to see people doing crazy. They want to see people fighting on the ramp and in the back and
Right.
in the crowd and using weapons and unexpected people showing up and like shit changing and stuff.
Right, just outlandish shit. Like, as much as we love Savage Steamboat from WrestleMania 3,
right,
that isn't what the 80s WWF was all about.
Not
and
at
that's
all.
not why they were drawn to the
It was
product.
the exception, not the standard.
Absolutely. It was Hulk Hogan's going to beat the evil Russian or the evil Killer Khan or
Right.
the evil this guy or the evil millionaire.
Or if it's a real special night, he's going to fight the Macho Man.
Right.
It's like,
Whoa.
whoa. Yeah.
But exactly, it was easy. It was what's one of the words you is it consumable? Is the word you use sometimes?
Yeah, consumable. Yeah,
Right?
it's watchable.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean? That's the other thing is like even I think I was trying to hit home on before too is that it's even like the catchphrases and the like that little
yeah.
shit. Like the fact that they could go in the arena in any country and the whole place can recite the entire speech that the New Age Outlaws say, or say go with the Godfather speech with the Ho Train and everything. Like everyone,
Or what does everybody want?
yeah,
Right?
yeah. That everybody knows the things, or like, you know, when Stone Cold said what, or
Yeah,
like,
or because Stone Cold said so.
Yeah, sometimes, you know, he'd do his, and and everyone would say that's the bottom line, or the Rock,
finally,
finally, the
right?
Rock has come back to New Hampshire or whatever the fuck, like, you know,
Who says that?
because he would be in every fucking state in the country.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you know, but like it was the fact that people knew all of these things, right? Is like, and you would talk to people and they would know them. People knew how many wins Goldberg had, like while his streak was
They
going,
did.
right? People knew all the members of the NWO,
And
like,
then the Wolf Pack.
the Wolf Pack, and they knew which guy was in the black and white NWO, and they knew which one was in the wolf. The fact that the audience even knew that
That's
is like
pretty good.
it's a lot of knowledge
That's
that
a lot of
doesn't. That's
things.
useless, by the way.
So before we talk about, and we'll do that briefly, the downfall of the boom, because every boom has like an end eventually.
bust.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
bust. Why was the culture like? Why did this happen? And how did wrestling slide in so well? Was it WWF that really did it, or was it WCW? Like, what do you?
Or was it just the culture? Did they just?
That's what
did
I'm
they
saying.
just? Was the timing just good or whatever?
It's one of those perfect storms, right?
Right,
Because it's
yeah.
like 2 years prior to 98, no one was talking
No one
about
gave a shit.
Right.
They still couldn't regularly sell out like a 10,000 seat arena.
Right. WCW rarely sold out big arenas, but they didn't. And WWF wasn't doing great either. But was Austin that big of a star? I mean, I think he was. He proved to be the number one merch seller. You know what I mean? Hogan still had name value, right?
Yeah.
Hogan turning bad was a huge shift.
I mean, like just the shift is so dramatic. WCW went from a company that no one gave a shit about to selling out the Georgia Dome in like 2 days because they heard that Goldberg was going to fight for the world title. Like, you know what I mean?
It
like,
was a big deal.
Like, everyone was doing good. Little ECW was profiting off of this.
They got on cable.
They got on people wanted them. And like they were going across the country too. And they even though it's their small little fiefdom, they were selling out arenas that nobody should even give a shit.
They were
right?
on TMN, but they had a show on cable. What happened in the culture? Because we've talked about when the 90s started and how in the very early 90s, the first couple of years, it's still an outgrowth of the 80s a little bit. We know grunge hit and that kind of like Gen X shift.
I think, it's a Gen X thing mostly.
Right. And we're not Gen X.
We're not Gen X, but I mean, it definitely captured the imagination of millennials who were younger during that time as well.
The impressionable millennials, right?
Yes. But this was Gen X's time to shine, right? This was the product for them. Right?
I think so. I think we reaped the benefits.
And the millennials were just little kids watching it and like, wow, this is so cool, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I just think the biggest factor ultimately when I step back and look at this is that wrestling was able to figure out how to ride the culture.
Like they did in the 80s.
Right. They figured out at the end of the day were matches in a ring with pinfalls, submissions, whatever. These are like the very basic core
bones.
things of what we are, right? This has to be on the thing.
Right, this is the basic necessity.
Right? Like there's a ring, there's an entrance.
There's a referee,
there's a
match.
There's a match, right? They figured out how to adapt what they were to the culture and the lifestyle and like the way people consumed things like catchphrases and stuff and like how they identified characters.
Okay.
They were able to adapt them with a Gen X spin on them that was very attractive to adults and children.
I think you nailed it.
Right.
That's what the culture was at the time. Everything was a rejection of, and I don't say this derisively, but it was a rejection of like the wholesome baby boomer led 80s.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a negative way.
I got to hand it to, a lot of it too is the Simpsons influence, believe it or not.
Before South Park, yes.
They're like, but this is a lot of like Simpsons style shit, right?
I think Simpsons overtaking Cosby's in the ratings is like the example of that, right? Like,
exactly.
It's time for a change here. But I think that's true. There's a shift in movies around the early 90s into the mid 90s. There's a shift in music as we, glam metal to grunge. And I think that wrestling took a couple extra years to catch up.
Right.
You know what I mean? To hit the pop culture the way that music did and other things changed. But
and part of that's too is just because they kept thinking the answer was if we could just repeat the 80s.
Yes.
What they didn't realize is we have to be the 90s. We can't just be the 80s over again.
That's a great point, Quinn, because even when WCW was kind of repeating the 80s, all it did was bring them up to WWF's current level,
right?
Which wasn't very good. It didn't like recapture their 80s success. It just brought them up a bit.
Right.
When WCW and WWF, they didn't shift. It wasn't like that far apart.
Right.
WCW shifted a little bit first, but WWF was right there behind them.
Right.
Like figuring out how to get edgier.
They had to.
When they did that, they rode a wave, and that wave was ridden throughout 1999 on the WWF. And WCW went downhill. We don't need to get into why. There's books on it. It doesn't matter, okay? It really doesn't.
It's not
important to the story.
If anything, it's more indicative, too, of the fact that when you're in the mainstream zeitgeist, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I think only one could really survive at the end of the day because as the popularity waned, this was being sustained off. You have to remember that both of them are attracting like a 10 together. If that gets cut in half, there's only room for one. And that's it.
That's pretty much what happened. WWF's ratings were even higher in 99.
Right.
But this time is because a lot of WCW people stopped watching.
What you really saw, and I think a lot of wrestling fans say, well, one's better than the other. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true, depending on your taste, right?
Sure.
But what that truly tells me is that they peaked as far as finding new people.
Yeah.
And then it started to shift to the better thing out of the remaining people that stuck. Right.
Pretty much. And some people just left WCW and never came back, too.
Right.
But 99 was huge. 2000 was, I mean, they're doing 5s, 6s, a 7 on occasion here and there, literally.
But look at how they're just capturing whatever was. We're not expanding beyond that 10.
No,
between both
no.
of them, right?
No, it
and
really
now
didn't.
WWF's got 8, and maybe WCW has 2.
That
right? You know, that's what's
occasionally,
going on. It's the audience has peaked.
And even by 2001, things were technically like still really, really good. Obviously, WrestleMania 17's buy rate. But what happened in 2001, this is a brief recap, is Steve Austin ceased being the Stone Cold that we all knew and loved. Not going to get into anything else about that, but let's just put it that way.
Yeah, some debate whether it was time or not time to do it, but
anything he did after that until he stopped wrestling in 2003, it was only 2 years later when he stopped, was kind of a half-baked version of what he originally was.
Right. But I mean,
for better or for worse.
I don't even think that's, like I said, I really think that, you know, beyond that point, I feel like the writing was on the wall anyway, even no matter what the heck they did creatively.
I think you're right.
That, okay, they're going to have to change again.
Yes.
This is not going to last. And I think they even knew that in 2001.
The Rock, who had been the second biggest star, arguably almost a 1B to Austin's 1A.
The equivalent to the Macho Man of the time.
Yeah.
Right?
He, at the young age of 29 in 2001, began being a part-timer.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Becoming a movie star.
Correct.
Right.
And the biggest reason for part of the competition going away is in March of 2001, Vince
Just
McMahon.
before that WrestleMania show. That's why this WrestleMania 17 show is so important. It really is like a marker of all this shit happened like weeks before it, right?
Yeah, days before it.
Days before it, yeah.
He bought WCW, effectively ending the Monday Night Wars.
Right, the competition was gone, and then the WWF had no creative reason to care.
ECW had just folded under a couple of months
also
before
got bought
that.
by the WWF.
Yeah, the library and all that.
Wrestling just became one company, basically.
Yep, and TNA, came up a year later, but we don't need to get into them.
Sting, Kurt Angle.
But the point is, it was around 2001 where the 90s boom ended, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think most people agree with that.
It's pretty well agreed upon among scholars of wrestling.
But the other thing is too, how long I've talked about this several times on both this show and our other show. Fads don't last that long anyway.
Right.
So like a 3-4 year run is really, really good.
Right. But I feel like
people grow up, they change, they move on, they get married, they graduate, whatever. You know what I mean? Their habits change.
I feel like what makes this fad interesting, well, yes, they're probably like officially on paper or some shit like more popular than like even then.
Well, they're more financially successful for sure.
They never were like the mainstream like they were in both the 80s and the 90s, where they were like what people were talking about.
No,
right?
They've had glimpses.
And
they have better connections now.
I feel like they even adapted when they couldn't do it for the third time. They figured out, well, we have to package this in times of the year when we harken back to where we like basically WrestleMania, where we say like, hey, you like The Rock, like you like Stone Cold,
that's right.
You like Chris Jericho or Diamond Dallas, or they'll pull one of these guys out and they'll be like, we know you like them and they're going to be at this thing, right? It's like that's basically like
it's like the old timers game. Quinn.
They basically became like a museum or some shit, right?
I like that.
They were like,
this exhibit,
this one time a year in March or April, depending on, we have this big, basically wrestling Comic Con called WrestleMania, where like if you liked it back then, if you like it now, come and watch. It's
Check
good.
out our new Shawn Michaels exhibit.
Yeah.
Like that type of thing.
And he might be there too,
it's true.
as an old man.
It's true. I think it's if you were watching at the time, especially 1998, from a pop culture point of view, I liked 97's product better. But if you were watching in 1998, it was just part of pop culture.
Right.
It was.
It was a special time.
It really was.
And I think it went with all of what 1998 was. I mean, it felt like, you get out of bed and there was some shit on in the morning, and then you go to school and you talk about like, I don't know, Metal Gear or fucking, video games. Twisted Metal. And then you come home and there was wrestling on, and maybe there was baseball.
Maybe you played GoldenEye later.
It's just like there was so much stuff.
Everything
like watch
was
South
affordable.
Park after
Watch
wrestling.
Howard Stern on E.
Watch Howard Stern, whatever.
Watch Conan.
There was just a bunch of things, right? All at once, and it was great.
And we wanted to capture that for you here on the special episode 100 of Acid Wash Memories. And we want to know your thoughts. If you got into wrestling, let us know when, and then let us know what this period meant to you. Maybe you hated it. I understand people that did. I really do.
Right.
But I loved it.
Right.
I don't care how it holds up. I'm saying at 13, I loved it.
It was the best.
Right?
Especially that once a week high you would get, right? From it.
I haven't experienced that feeling quite that same way since that period of time. We want to hear from you guys that maybe got involved in wrestling because of the Attitude Era and then stopped watching. Why did you stop? When did you stop? We want to hear these things. Most of all, though, we want to thank you for 100 episodes of Acid Wash Memories. I'm going to remind you one last time here, and we'll put it on the Facebook group as well, that we will be taking a holiday hiatus, a double H, not triple. We'll be taking the next 2 weeks off from new episodes. That's the next 2 weeks off, okay?
Holiday travel, whatnot. Listen to the archives or something while you're driving to a relative's house or whatever.
On Festivus or whatever you're doing. We will be back in 2025 in the brandy new year for a brandy new episode. But until that time, we want to thank you guys for being with us here. Your support means a lot to us. Please follow us on the Twitter at AWM Podcast. Join our Facebook group. But this is Joe Morana and Michael Quinn, and we are out of here.
See ya.
Like what you heard? Be sure to leave a review and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We will see you next week.